TRID 101, Closing Disclosure. In this video, we will be discussing important items to note regarding the closing disclosure and its acknowledgement. The most important thing to remember is that Provident Funding will be the only entity issuing the closing disclosure. This disclosure is automatically generated after the dock order process has been completed. The closing agent will have access to review the closing disclosure prior to closing during their portion of the dock order process. Once a closing disclosure is issued, a loan estimate can no longer be issued. Now, let's talk about the waiting periods associated with the closing disclosure. The closing cannot take place until the third rescission day after the borrower has received the closing disclosure. Receipt is considered to be the earlier of the third rescission day after the date the closing disclosure is emailed or placed in the mail, or the date Provident Funding documents acknowledgement of receipt. This is either done electronically if the borrower opted in to receive e-disclosures or by a paper version. Please note, rescission days are defined as Monday through Saturdays, excluding holidays. Rescission loans. In rescindable transactions, the closing disclosure must be given separately to each borrower who has the right to rescind under TILA. If a non-borrowing spouse is required to sign, their closing disclosure will be sent postal mail. If they choose to acknowledge receipt, their only option is to acknowledge via the paper version. Non-rescission loans. A separate closing disclosure does not need to be issued to each individual borrower. The closing disclosure will be sent to the mailing address or email address of the primary borrower. The electronic version of the closing disclosure acknowledgement is shown. This method allows you to take advantage of the benefits of electronic delivery. Remember, acknowledging receipt of this disclosure is not required, but can reduce the waiting period to close the loan. The applicant can acknowledge receipt immediately without the need to involve the broker. Postal mail delivery is slower. The applicant must receive the disclosure, print it, execute it, and return it to the broker to scan and upload it. Finally, Provident Funding must review it. This is an example of the paper version that is sent along with the closing disclosure once the dock order process has been completed. If the primary borrower did not acknowledge their intent to proceed electronically, the broker will need to upload this executed form through their pipeline in PF Loans. Revisions and corrections. Revisions and corrections to the closing disclosure fall under one of three categories. First, changes that occur before consummation that require a new 3 rescission day waiting period. APR changes by more than 0.125% or basic loan product changes are some examples. Second, changes that occur before consummation that do not require a new waiting period. For any changes not listed above that take place prior to consummation, a new closing disclosure must be provided and must be received by the consumer at or before consummation. Changing from a 30-year to a 20-year would be an example not requiring an additional waiting period. Third, changes that occur after consummation. There are two potential types of changes and both require a new closing disclosure to be issued. The first type is a revision to the closing disclosure that results in a change to an amount paid by the consumer from what was previously disclosed. For example, an incorrect payoff amount or a change to per diem interest. The second type would be a non-numerical clerical error. For example, incorrect settlement service provider payee. This concludes Provident Funding's TRID 101 closing disclosure. Thank you for attending.